Right before we jump into this video, if you're watching it, it's probably because you have a lot of camera gear, but how do you keep track of all of it? Well, if you didn't know, I created a free app called My Gear Vault, which is the best way to input, organize, and protect your gear. And you can download it right now for iOS and Android at mygearvault.com. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a side-by-side comparison, aka a versus video between the Nikon Z7 and the Nikon D850. So the point of this video is to help anybody out there decide whether or not you would like to buy a Z7 or a D850 if those are the two options that you have. Or if you have a D850, is it worth upgrading and adding a Z7 to your bag or not? But let's jump into the first spec and let's talk about the sensor in the Nikon Z7. You've got a 45.7 megapixel FX format BSI CMOS sensor with no AA filter. On the D850 side, you have a 45.7 megapixel FX format BSI CMOS sensor with no AA filter. Do they sound like they're the same sensors? Raise your hand if you say yes. I say yes, but Nikon says no, they're not the same sensors. They're pretty darn similar. In this case, nobody gets a check mark to start off. Nobody. Now let's talk about the mount. Now keep in mind that Nikon has had the same mount, the F mount, since 1959. They haven't changed it. Now with the introduction of the Z7, they've come out with a Z mount. So now you have Z mount lenses that go onto this camera. The D850 still has the F mount, so any of those lenses from 1959 and on can go onto this camera. Now with that being said, the Nikon Z7 can take an F to Z adapter, so you can adapt your modern F mount lenses, all the autofocus ones, all the AFS ones, onto this camera and use them natively without any autofocus issues, basically with no issues at all. You're taking the F lenses that you already have and you're putting them onto the Z7. So the first check mark of the day goes to the Z7. Now let's move into the ISO capabilities of these cameras, starting with the Z7. The Z7 goes from 64 to 25,600, expandable to 102,400. The D850 goes from 64 to 25,600, expandable to 102,400, or basically, they do the exact same thing. So how do you determine who gets a check mark here? Well, I'm gonna call on DP Review because they are somebody who does super high, over-the-top tests, in my opinion, of these cameras. So what they have found, when you push the Z7 4, 5, 6 stops, meaning bringing back the shadows and the highlights because your exposure was so far off, you start to see some banding. Now, those bands are caused by the phase detect AF sensors that are on the image sensor themselves. You won't see that show up in the D850. But the moral of the story here is don't be off by 4, 5, or 6 stops when you're taking photos. Get your exposure much better. In this case, I'll give a half a check mark to the D850. Since I just mentioned autofocusing points, let's look at the Z7 because it has 493 phase detect autofocusing points that go edge to edge. You can go all the way to the top with your autofocusing points, all the way to the bottom. It has 90% coverage. It honestly feels like more than that because you can go all the way over to the left and right hand sides except for just one small box. So there's a ton of autofocusing points there. Now moving on to the D850, you have 153 autofocusing points with 99 of them being cross-type sensors. Now in this case, I like having more autofocusing points. Some people may say that the D850 has better autofocusing capability than the Z7. I think the Z7 is pretty darn good with its autofocus. Now, with that being said, the D850 has 3D tracking. People love that 3D tracking so that the camera makes all the decisions for them and follows the subjects. I personally only use it if I'm gonna shoot birds or if I'm gonna shoot airplanes that are moving fast because then the 3D autofocus tracking does great with that. The Z7 doesn't offer you the 3D tracking any longer. They have a new form of autofocus tracking, but it's not as good as the D850. Let's just say this. In terms of being able to move your autofocusing points further, I'm gonna give a check mark to the Z7. in terms of having that 3D autofocusing capability, I'll give a check mark to the D850. But overall, personally, I think I like having the ability to move my autofocusing points anywhere I can on the screen up to 90% coverage. I think I'm going with the Z7 for its autofocus capability. Being that I'm a low light shooter, not a low life shooter, don't mix the two up, which camera can focus better in low light situations? The D850 is rated for lower light situations when it comes to autofocus, whereas the Z7, not as much. I haven't run into too many issues in low light situations with the Z7 where it's given me any issues, but in this case, because the D850 can do better in low light situations, we'll give that a checky McCheckmark. Frame rate is a big deal to people. That's how many frames a second you can shoot. The Z7 will give you 9 frames a second in 12-bit RAW in the high extended mode. Now, if you haven't used a Z7 just yet, what that means is when you're taking pictures, you're seeing a preview every time you take a picture of the last picture that you just took. So it's a little more herky-jerky as you're trying to follow your subject. But you do have the ability to shoot at 5.5 frames a second in normal high mode in 14-bit RAW. Now the D850 on the other side, right out of the box, can do 7 frames a second. But if you add the vertical grip and a D5 battery, you can shoot 9 frames a second with no loss of quality. That is awesome. Now, speaking of battery grips, you have one on the D850 with full functionality to change your settings. Z7, not so much. There's a development announcement of a battery pack, which does make it a little easier to hold the camera and puts an extra battery in there so you get longer battery life, but it doesn't have any buttons. So you can't change your exposure, you can't shoot any pictures when you're shooting vertically or horizontally. It doesn't allow you to do that. In this case, the D850 wins for better frames per second, natively shooting 14-bit uncompressed RAW, and it wins because you can add that grip and get more frames per second. But keep in mind, it's $350 to buy a D5 battery charger, and it's $100 and some to get a D5 battery. So you're adding an extra $500–600 if you want to do that on top of having to buy that grip. Still, get a grip, D850 checkmark. Moving on to the buffer. The Z7 will give you 18 RAW files in the buffer. Compare that to 51 RAW files in the D850. 2 extra check marks go to the D850 for this one because it has a much better buffer. Now, I didn't really outrun this camera, the Z7, when I shot at the 5.5 frames per second because it's really quick to write to the cards, but I'm not gonna sit here and try to justify it being better because it has a smaller buffer, because in this case, the D850's buffer is just better. We know one major difference between these two cameras is one is a mirrorless camera and one is a DSLR. Now that means that there's different types of shutters inside of these cameras. The Z7 has a mechanical shutter that tops out at 1/8000th of a second. The D850 has a mechanical shutter that tops out at 1/8000th of a second. The Z7 has an electronic shutter which allows you to shoot up to 1/8000th of a second, but shoot in complete silence. The D850, it actually has the ability to shoot silent as well, but the problem is you need to use the back of the screen, you need to touch the screen to focus because you don't have an electronic viewfinder to look through. It gives you that ability to do it, it's just not as good as the Z7, so in this case, the Z7 gets the check mark. Let me cut in here real quick and let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is what I personally use for jaredpolin.com and my online portfolio. If you're looking to build your own website, go to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto to get a 14-day free trial. And if you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now let's get back to the video. These days, a lot of people call themselves hybrid shooters. Now, if you're somebody who likes to shoot photos and shoot video, one of these cameras is going to be a little better than the other. Now, if you're somebody who's just focusing on stills, yeah, the D850 is still going to be a great option for that, but let's look at the video features of the Z7. It will shoot full frame 4K with pixel binning video. It also shoots DX cropped 4K with oversampling from 5K without pixel binning. It will do 10-bit 422 with N-Log with a slight crop, and it will do 1080p video at 120 frames a second, either with sound or without sound. Now the D850 on the other side will do full frame 4K with pixel binning, 1080p 120 frames a second, but it will only bake in those files and it will not give you sound. Now the Z7 clearly wins in this case because I think the video is better quality than what you're getting out of the D850. Honestly, we're using a D850 right now, which is great in the studio when it's locked off. But the major differences become the auto-focusing capability. Nikon says the D850 has face priority autofocus that uses contrast detection, and guess what? It sucks. Like, really, really sucks. Now the Z7, on the other hand, has a new feature called AFF, which has subject tracking and full-time autofocus that doesn't suck. It doesn't even come close to sucking. It's actually really, really competitive compared to the Canons and the Sonys. So in this case, 23 check marks. I know that's a lot of check marks, but 23 check marks go to the Z7 for better video capabilities all around. Another great video feature that you find with the Z7 is 5-axis in-body stabilization. But it's not just for video, it's for stills. So any lens that you put on this camera will have image stabilization, including ones that already have VR. It will still use your VR and the in-body stabilization. The D850, on the other hand, offers you some 3-axis electronic stabilization, which is not going to be very useful for pretty much anything. So in this case, for running and gunning for video, for hand holding at slower shutter speeds, the Z7 is gonna win every single time. Checkmark Z7. Now I know these cameras are very similar with most of their features, but being that the Z7 is a mirrorless camera, it has an electronic viewfinder, whereas the D850 has an optical viewfinder. Now do you see how I said those? I said those both really positively, because there's really nothing negative about an optical viewfinder, well, other than the fact that you can't see your exposure live. You do have 100% viewfinder coverage, but you also have 100% viewfinder coverage on your Z7. Now, I did make a video that explains the difference between an optical viewfinder and an electronic viewfinder. That you could click the I or the link down below so you can see the differences there. This starts to become personal preference, but once you use an electronic viewfinder, especially a high quality one like Nikon put in here that is 3.69 million dots, you really can't tell the difference between the optical viewfinder and the electronic viewfinder, at least in terms of quality. What I love about electronic viewfinders is seeing my exposure right in front of my eye. As it changes, as I change it, am I over, am I underexposed, I can tweak it right from there. I can change menu settings right inside the viewfinder without having to take my eye away from it, whereas with the optical viewfinder, you're always chimping to check all of these other things. I love an electronic viewfinder. I think the pros far outweigh the cons of having an electronic viewfinder versus the optical viewfinder. Now, I know a lot of old-time shooters are gonna be like, I can't go and use an electronic viewfinder because it's gonna mess with me. It doesn't mess with you. I think it will make you a better photographer as well. So check mark Z7. The Z7 offers you a 3.2-inch, 2.1 million dot tilting touchscreen, whereas the Nikon D850 offers you a 2.36 million dot tilting touchscreen, which is slightly better. I like more resolution. So in this case, we're giving a check mark to the D850 for the higher resolution. Now, something that the D850 has that the Z7 doesn't have is back illuminated buttons. Because it's a larger camera, they have the ability to squeeze those things in this camera. I like the back illuminated buttons. They are great when you're in a lower light situation and you need to see what buttons are without, bringing out your cell phone to point it at the back of the camera. So in this case, for the screen and for the buttons, checkmark D850. Which one of these cameras is going to be heavier? I will let you guess. Did you get your guess in yet? Yeah, you're right. The the D850 is heavier. It clocks in at 2.01 pounds or 915 grams, whereas the Z7, which is a little more dainty, comes in at 1.29 pounds or 585 grams. So you can see the difference here. The D850 is a beast. It's big, it's heavy, it feels great in the hands. The Z7 is lighter. Still feels really good in the hands because of the nice big grip that they built onto it. They didn't do what Sony did and make a really small, light, hard to hold camera. With that being said, you can still get a vertical grip for the D850, which is going to help if you have larger hands, where you can't do that with the Z7. Also, sometimes your pinky may end up on the bottom underneath the camera if you have bigger hands. The function buttons are a little harder to reach on the Z7 versus the D850. But if you're a little older and you want something lighter and easier to carry around, the Z7 is a better option for you in that case. I don't mind either way. I like the feel of the Z7. I hate the fact that it doesn't have a grip. I really would love the grip. In this case, I'm not giving a check mark to either one because they both have pros and cons depending on what you're looking for. They are super, super similar. Again, though, I will give a check mark just for the hell of it for the D850 for having an option of having a grip. I wanted to cut in here real quick and let you know that we just released 14 custom Lightroom presets. Check out the different looks you can get quickly by using presets like Black and White Boomify, Aquamarine, Sandlot, Color Boomify, Skittles, and more. Head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets to play with and purchase all 14 of these presets at 40% off for a limited time. Now let's jump back to the video. I'm a big fan of shooting redundant in my cameras, meaning if I have 2 card slots, like in the D850, I go ahead and shoot RAW files to both, just in case something ever happens to one of those cards. So in the D850, you will find that you have 1 XQD card slot and 1 SD slot that is UHS 2. 2 really good slots. I would prefer having 2 XQD cards because those are super fast and super reliable for the most part. On the Z7, you have 1 XQD card slot. Nikon says because they're super reliable, I do need to tell you that in the D850, while we were recording earlier today, we did have it error on a file. So that was more of a camera issue than a card issue. But that's not something you want to have go wrong. A lot of people who are wedding photographers don't want to risk something going wrong with their camera where they lose 1 card. If that's you and you're worried about having just 1 card, then the Z7 may not be for you. But if you can get past that, I'm still having trouble getting past that myself. I've done a bunch of shoots with it, and I do hate having to worry about will that 1 card fail on me and will I lose everything. That's why my hope is that Nikon comes out with future cameras that have 2 card slots in their mirrorless cameras. In this case, for the 2 card slots, I'm giving a check mark, not begrudgingly, because it deserves it, to the D850. But you need to decide, can you live with the trade-offs? Can you worry about it? If you worry about it, then the Z7 isn't for you. If you think that the features are much better in a Z7 for you, then of course you can go with it. Battery life is an issue for everybody. How many shots can you get? How much video can you shoot? The Nikon Z7 uses an ENEL15B battery that allows you to do USB charging when the camera is off. The D850 uses an ENEL15A battery, but if you add the vertical grip, you can use the Nikon D5 battery and basically shoot thousands of images before you ever need to change the battery or charge it. The Z7, I've squeezed out over 700 images with still 5% battery life left from just shooting stills. So you do get a good amount of shots out of it, but I would still love to have that grip and have that extra large battery. For battery life, we're going check mark with D850 because you have the ability to add the grip and the D5 battery. Now, before we get to the price, I have 2 extremely important tests to do right now. We'll start with the wind tunnel. Here we go. Wind tunnel test will commence in 3, 2, 1, and blow. I did not expect that to happen. I did not expect it. I didn't expect the D850 to win the wind tunnel test. Let me tell you why. It won because all the air got caught up on the big grip of the Z7. I didn't expect that to happen, but let's look at the second test, which is the sniffy sniff. Sniff test. Roses. Butterflies. Nobody gets a check mark. They both smell good. And finally, the price. The price is definitely going to show us which one's the winner, right? All right. The Z7 comes in at $3546.95 with the added adapter, which is $150 more at this time when you buy it together. You're gonna need the adapter, so that's the price. The price of the D850 is $3296.95. They are basically priced exactly the same. These two cameras are very similar. I think the D850 is one of the best, if not the best, DSLR ever made. That's well-rounded and versatile and affordable for most people who are photographers and looking to be pros and are working. This is one of the greatest cameras ever made. The Z7 is an evolutionary step to the next thing, which are mirrorless cameras. Which should you go with? If I was starting out today and I'm looking to be a hybrid shooter, I shoot stills, I shoot video, I want to shoot silent, I find it hard to say not to go with a Z7. The Z7 is extremely well-rounded. If you're somebody who's just doing stills, you have your F-mount lenses. You don't want to go with the mirrorless camera for whatever reason. You like the feel and the size of the D850, and the stills are really just your focus. You can't go wrong with the D850 either. But if you want to have those autofocusing points that move all over the screen that cover 90% of your viewfinder, the Z7 is going to be great for that. If you're a studio shooter, and you work just in the studio and you shoot tethered, D850 all day. This is going to be a viable camera from now and long into the future. But if you throw video in at all and you need autofocus, the Z7 is a better choice. It's a better option. So you can see this is a difficult decision. I want to know what you think. Leave a comment down below with which one you would go with. I did say that if you did have a D850, should you go and get a Z7 yet? You have to ask yourself that question. Do you shoot video? Do you want something smaller and lighter? Can you live with the one card slot? Can you live with not having the vertical grip? I find it hard to not have that vertical grip, but I do think that the pros far outweigh the cons with going with a Z7. If you already have a D850, you're probably not selling it unless you really need those other features. So you need to think about that, and then you can make a decision from there. If you'd like to purchase either of these cameras, or any camera gear for that matter, go to adorama.com/fro, because when you use that link, it helps us continue to make free, fun, and informative content. So I know that this was a long video. I know it's tough to make the decisions between these two, but please let me know what you think down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell button so you can be notified when new videos go live. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.